Today I saw Captain Underpants, and boy am I disappointed. I wasn't expecting much and I was still let down. Not that it was necessarily worse than I thought it would be, but I guess I just didn't really prepare myself for how bad it was going to be. Where do I even begin? Well, I guess the clearest thing I can say is it's not faithful to the books. If you look at it, it looks like the books, because the character design in this movie is just amazing, but everything else just feels like a generic, dumb DreamWorks movie, like the kind they've been making lately, like The Boss Baby or Mr. Peabody and Sherman, which are also both adaptations that weren't faithful to the source material. At least I don't think The Boss Baby was, but that doesn't really matter because that's based on a picture book. There's a lot of liberties they can take. But as I said in my video where I talked about the trailer for this movie, the story of Captain Underpants does matter. It's not something you can just change. The characters and the concept aren't the only important things. The story is important too. Because these books do have a storyline that connects one book to the other. Like, you can't just really read the fourth book without having read the first three. I guess you could, and you could kind of pick up what's going on because they do have like a comic at the beginning that catches you up on what's happened so far. But the fact that they even have to catch you up on what's happened so far goes to show that those books are important to read before you read that one. If you started with the fourth book, it would just spoil the story of the first three. Because there are twists and the characters develop throughout the series. Which again, like I said in the video I did for the trailer, I'm probably just going to repeat a lot of stuff I said in that video because I assume people watching this video probably haven't seen it. But anyway, I know it sounds weird that the Captain Underpants books would have this story that stretches throughout all the books. You just expect fart jokes and stuff. And there is a lot of toilet humor, but it is also just a great book series. It's really funny, but it's also a great story, because Dav Pilkey is a great author. And so what I thought they were going to do for this movie was mash together the first four books, which they kind of did. And that's already a terrible idea on its own, but not only did they do that, but they also kind of just wrote their own story using the characters that's completely new. Kind of like how The Circle did it, where they just pick and choose random elements from the books and then make something with that. Never staying completely faithful to the whole thing, but staying faithful to those couple elements that you take from the books. Like, for example, the character design, or how they had a lot of references to the books hidden in the background. But the story itself was new, and I know maybe a lot of people wouldn't be bothered by that, so okay, fair enough. But I would also go as far to say as it's not even a good story on its own. Like, if this was just an original movie and this was the story, it's still not good. It feels really thrown together. They just have one thing happen after another, like this happens and then this happens and then this guy shows up and then he does this and then that leads to this and this happens and this happens, and then they just wrap it all together kind of quick at the end. Like, it's not really complicated. Neither are the books, but they're still told well. For example, in the fourth book, which this movie probably took from the most, without really spoiling anything too much, when they introduce the villain Professor Poopy Pants, the book starts out with a chapter about George and Harold, and then they go to a chapter about Professor Poopy Pants, and then back to George and Harold for like 2 chapters, and eventually, a couple chapters in, their stories meet up. And that's how they showed the backstory to Professor Poopy Pants and how he became the way he was to be the antagonist in the story. In this movie, they just shoehorn in a flashback after he's already been established at the school George and Harold go to. And they also did that really quickly, like, while George and Harold were messing around in the city with Captain Underpants, as they're leaving the scene, they cut to Professor Poopy Pants on like a street corner. Like, oh, by the way, here's the bad guy. No introduction, no backstory, just there he is, and then in like the next scene, he goes to the school. The bad guy just shows up. I don't know about you, but I think Dav Pilkey pulled that off a lot better than they did in the movie. And then the third book is almost not referenced at all, except for the really important thing that affected the series that happened in the third book. Probably the biggest event to happen in the third book, which I'm not going to spoil, but they also just shoehorn that in at the end. And it doesn't have a lot of impact in the story. They just rewrite a lot of the story to be not as good. Like, lazier. And then there's the humor. There were like 2 jokes that made me laugh, and then the rest of it was just okay, I guess. Like, it's a kid's movie, it felt like kids' movie humor. But as I reread the first 4 books before I went to see the movie, I found myself laughing more. Like, the movie didn't really capture Dav Pilkey's humor. I think I've pretty much covered the basics of how they screwed this movie up. They also added another character that's supposed to, like, bring out the humanity in Mr. Krupp, which is not a necessary character to have, but it especially doesn't make sense because in this movie they make Mr. Krupp a way more evil character than he is in the books, I think. Don't get me wrong, he and the other teachers are just terrible characters in the books. At one point they like hold George and Harold back from a field trip and then laugh at them as they drive away in the buses. So they do some pretty cartoonishly jerky things. But Mr. Krupp also has a lot of motive in the books to hate George and Harold and to want them to be miserable. Not that it's right, but George and Harold caused so much trouble for Mr. Krupp and the other teachers in the school. So he has a motive, and he also has that same motive in the movie, but they also make it seem like he's just evil for the sake of being evil. Like, they say how he hates Christmas and stuff like that. I don't know, it's not too far off from Mr. Cup's character, but I think they exaggerated it a little too much, at least in my opinion. They kind of did the same thing with Melvin. Not too far off, but just a little bit more exaggerated than I think they were in the books. So it really didn't make sense when they tried to humanize Mr. Cup's character after they just make him like this cartoonishly evil guy. But then they were like, oh, maybe he's not such a bad guy after all. They give him like a love interest and stuff. They add like this character that's not even in the books. She's like a lunch lady, so they wrote out the 3 lunch lady characters from the 3rd book to add this new character in, played by Kristen Shaw. I thought she was gonna play the secretary, which would have been good, but no, she plays this extra character. That's another thing. The secretary and the other teachers, they have like no lines in this movie. They don't really deliver any jokes. They really get pushed to the side, like they're just there so you see familiar faces from the book. And if you look at the casting, they had some pretty good voice talent behind them. One of the teachers was played by Brian Posehn, if I'm pronouncing that right. He's like a known comedian, and the one line he delivered sounded right, like he was well cast for that role. And also the person playing Miss Ribble, she sounded right for the role. And then Mel Rodriguez is also in this movie as Mr. Fide, I guess because he kind of looks like him with the build and the mustache, which doesn't really make sense because it's an animated movie, but I think that's good casting. He delivered like one line as the character, and it was pretty good. But that's it, just one line. Like, the teachers didn't get any lines. I would think if they ever did a sequel to this movie, which I hope to God they don't, but I think if they ever did, they'd probably use the Wedgie Woman character. And Wedgie Woman is just Miss Ribble, who they give like no lines in this movie. So if they do suddenly make her a big character and the antagonist of the 2nd movie, it won't really mean as much because she was barely in the 1st one. Geez, I really hope they don't make a 2nd one. But yeah, that's pretty much how they ruined this movie. What could they have done differently? Well, I think they should have just adapted it as it was on the page. I think that's how most adaptations should go, but they rarely ever are. I know the books are pretty small, but I think if they had taken the first 3 books and then condensed those into one movie, that would have been, I don't know, I think that would have worked well. Especially since there was that big event that happens at the end of the 3rd one. That would be a good note to end the 1st movie on. Instead, they took the first 4 books and then did God knows what to them, made some Frankenstein creation of a movie. And also they took Captain Underpants' origin story from one of the later books, and they put that right at the beginning of the movie. It was the intro for some reason. And I can't remember what his origin story was like, because I read that book a while ago, so I don't know if they did that very faithfully or not, but I did see a page from his origin story. Someone screen capped it and put it on Tumblr, because they were pointing out that Captain Underpants was raised by 2 dudes, so he has 2 dads. But in the movie, of course, they got rid of that, and they replaced his parents with 2 dolphins for some reason, because apparently random equals funny. And not only that, but they made it very clear that it's like a male and a female dolphin, because one of them was in a dress and one of them had like a hat and a cigar or something. I might be making that up, but they were clearly like male and female dolphin. Not even cartoon dolphins are allowed to be gay in movies. So anyway, I gave this movie a 4 out of 10. So far, it's the worst movie I've seen from this year. I just thought it was really awful. Just a terrible adaptation and then very lazily written on top of it. Not even an original song by Weird Al could save this movie. And you know, that was actually extra cool because they even reference Weird Al in the 1st book. It says that one of George and Harold's pranks was that they rigged all the intercoms so that they played Weird Al Yankovic songs full blast for 6 hours straight. That actually makes me really happy because he's also my favorite musician. And Captain Underpants is also a series I really love. So even though it's for this terrible movie, the fact that Weird Al made a song for Captain Underpants is still pretty cool. Too bad it still has Ed Helms saying Captain Underpants lines in the song. So that kind of ruins it for me. I wish there was like an edit without that in it. Oh my god, I almost forgot to say. I did talk about the casting a little bit, but the casting for the main characters, which I also talked about in that other video. But yeah, the casting is the worst. They have Thomas Middleditch and Kevin Hart, 2 grown men playing George and Harold. Not kids, not even adult women like they do with Bart or the characters on Rugrats. Just 2 grown men who happen to be famous actors so that they can put that on the poster so people will want to see it. Like, oh, that's the guy from Silicon Valley. I don't mind Ed Helms and Nick Kroll being in it as much. Nick Kroll was okay. I really didn't like Ed Helms as Captain Underpants. Probably because I just don't like Ed Helms after seeing him in the Lorax. God, that movie was so bad. He was really bad in that. I don't know, like every voice he does sounds like he's doing a Santa Claus imitation for children. Like really hamming it up like he's talking to a baby or something. I don't know, I think he's a bad voice actor. Kevin Hart and Thomas Middleditch were fine, but they're not children. It sounded like 2 grown men were talking over George and Harold, especially because of the animation. Now I know what you're probably thinking. The animation in this movie looked amazing. And I kind of agree. I think the animation is definitely the best part about thismovie. If you just look at a screenshot of the movie, it looks fantastic. It looks exactly like a Captain Underpants movie should look. It looks like they took the drawings of Dave Pilkey, whatever. Looks like they took his drawings and brought them to life in a cartoon, which is what they were doing, so it should look like that. But it just looks fantastic. The way they design the characters is spot on. Unfortunately, the character movement kind of bothered me. I didn't like that as much. That's why I said if you just look at a picture of the movie, it looks amazing. Because the character design and the set design and the way everything looks, that's amazing. But the way everyone's moving is really distracting. Like, they always have to have something for characters to look at. I feel like the characters in this movie are always moving. They never stop. When Professor Poopy Pants is introducing himself to Mr. Krupp, he's just like saying casual lines, like introducing himself. But then his character model starts like moving around and lying down on Mr. Krupp's desk. And then there's also another scene where Mr. Krupp is yelling at George and Harold and his arms are just waving around like he's Kermit the Frog. And pretty much every scene is like that. The characters never stop moving and it's totally distracting. It makes it feel even more like a movie just for really little children. They always have to have something to look at. I didn't like that at all. Some people might disagree, but I don't think that looked right. It made the lines coming out of the character's mouth feel even more out of place, especially from George and Harold, because they're moving so much and then the voices don't even match the people talking anyway, that it feels like it's just people talking over the animation as it's going. I feel like this fantastic character design kind of went to waste on this bad movie, because if they ever did a reboot and a whole other Captain Underpants movie from scratch, hopefully more faithful to the books, they'd have to animate it some different way so that it's not completely the same as the DreamWorks movie. But I feel like they already perfected it here with the character design, so it's a real shame. Oh, you know what? One other good thing about this movie, besides the Weird Al song and the character design, they also had some beautiful 2D animation and even one scene that was filmed with just sock puppets, which is a little weird, but I think it felt right in this movie. I think that was a pretty good scene, and it was a really high quality scene for something made with sock puppets too. So yeah, those were the three good things about this movie. The 2D and sock puppet scenes, the character design, and the song by Weird Al. That's pretty much it. There's also a lot of minor things that bothered me about this movie that if I was just going through the movie and pointing them all out, there would be a lot. That sentence is kind of redundant. But anyway, like for example, how nonsensical and cartoony the world is. Like they show a montage of George and Harold's pranks, and one of them is just that they have a tiger in someone's office. Also another thing, that tiger looked amazing. It was like a realistic looking tiger, like the one from Uncle Grandpa. That was a nice touch in that scene. I don't know if it really fit completely, because they don't really have anything like that in the book where there's like a picture, but it was a cool twist for a DreamWorks animated movie to have something like that in it. I think besides the characters moving too much, animation-wise, this is a great step for DreamWorks. Everything else is a terrible step. I mean, it's about the same. All their movies lately have been garbage. But it looks like the animation is going in a cool direction. Or at least the design, like I said. But yeah, anyway, that thing with the tiger and like other things, like how Mr. Krupp has a cartoonishly metal door that slams down, it creates a different atmosphere than what I think the books are like. Which is weird, because even though these crazy things happen in the book, like there's aliens and robots and everything, the characters at the school and stuff live kind of normal lives. It's more like Disney's Recess than The Amazing World of Gumball. There is this cartoonish magic aspect of the world, but characters like George and Harold and the other students and the other teachers, they're pretty human in like the way that the characters in Recess are human. They can't just magically get a tiger and put it in an office. They can maybe magically get a bunch of shampoo like they did in the first book. They had a bunch of shampoo that they used for a prank. Like, how did they get that shampoo? I don't know. Doesn't matter. It's a kid's book. How did they get a tiger? That's a whole different story. That means they're capable of a lot more. I'm probably overthinking it, but that's just like one of the minor issues I had with the movie, that if I was pointing them all out, like I said, there'd be a lot. So maybe I'll rewatch the movie one day, pointing out all this stuff, and make a video on that, like I've been planning to do with a series of unfortunate events and some other stuff, like maybe Riverdale, although there's already some pretty good videos on Riverdale, and why that's so terrible. But yeah, I don't know, I might do that someday. Probably no one else is gonna do it. Doesn't seem anyone really cares about this movie as much to point out all of its flaws. They're just like, yeah, it's another stupid DreamWorks movie. But the fact that it's supposed to be Captain Underpants is why I care so much, because I think it's a disgrace to the series. Anyway, I guess that's about it. I still haven't seen Trolls. That's another DreamWorks movie. So next time, I guess I'll see that.